All right, welcome everyone. I believe we are live. So for the right now over 100 folks that are already joining us, I would love to know, who you are, where you're from. There's a chat on the left-hand side of the screen where you can share kind of where you're tuning in from, and we're going to give folks about 1 or 2 minutes to join us, and then we will get started with our webinar today. All right, so today we're going to be doing things just a little bit differently. So, unfortunately, our guest today, Elizabeth, has very little voice. And so, when the time is right, she is going to be introducing her voice assistant. That we've already rehearsed all of this stuff, so it's going to go pretty smooth. But what's exciting is she's also going to be available in the chat. So if there's any questions about any of the stuff that comes up or how to use some of the strategies in the practical environment, she will be there for us. So without further ado, let me introduce our panel. First, we have Dr. Molly Jameson. She is an expert in math anxiety. In fact, she developed one of the first scales for measuring math anxiety and has been researching this for decades. So we are very, very, very fortunate to have her with us today. She teaches in Colorado at the University of Northern Colorado. She has courses on learning, assessment, psychology, all of the stuff that goes into what makes up a math anxiety problem and how to analyze it. And then our other guest is Elizabeth Moreland. Elizabeth is an instructional coach in Iowa with 13 years of experience in the classroom. She's constantly thinking about ways to add stuff to a math environment that would make it safer for kids, more exciting for kids, potentially movement-based for kids. Elizabeth, you want to introduce yourself briefly, and then we can tell everyone on who Alexa is.
Yes. Hi, guys. I'm Elizabeth, and I apologize that I won't be as involved as I was hoping to be today, but we are lucky to have Alexa here. And so some of the questions I have answered ahead of time, and Alexa will be the voice reading those answers. I think you'll understand it a lot better. The voice will just be clear coming from Alexa. So, Alexa, you can go ahead and introduce yourself. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. I am from Unruly Studios. I'm a school success manager, meaning I work with teachers like Elizabeth to make sure they have everything that they need to be successful in the classroom with our products. But I'm excited to be here and to hopefully do justice to the answers that Elizabeth has provided. So I will be playing the role of Elizabeth today.
And then Dr. Jameson or Molly, I'd love to give you a second to add to the introduction and welcome you to the panel here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. As James said, I have been researching math anxiety for about 20 years. We were just chatting before we started. I was saying when I very first started researching math anxiety, I could only find one published article looking at math anxiety in children. And now 20 years later, it is, a really relevant topic that a lot of folks are aware of. And so I'm excited to be here and to share my knowledge and experience with y'all.
Thank you, and thank you both for being here, and especially Alexa for last minute jumping in and joining us. My name is James. I'm also with Unruly Studios, and I'll be kind of playing the host and going through the different slides and teeing up some questions, hopefully to extract some information so that you guys can use it in your schools and in your classrooms. So, the topic today is leadership strategies for reducing math anxiety. Over the last 10 years, there's been an explosion of new tools going into the classrooms and a lot of thought on how we can, make this a little bit more efficient for the teacher, or how we can add more resources or bring more tools to be more personalized. But at the same time, a lot of that addition has been adding more anxiety to the kids that are actually trying to learn the stuff and the teachers that are actually trying to teach the stuff. So today we're going to try to pull that onion back and look at what's going on in the classroom and say, hey, how can we create an environment where kids are psychologically safe and encouraged and comfortable tackling a challenge as daunting as math? And I know most of you probably have your own math stories growing up, whether it be a big task or a test or something like that that has caused you personally anxiety with this topic. Our agenda today is going to cover a handful of topics. So the first is we're going to look at what causes math anxiety, the symptoms, how anxiety can undermine other math performance, the connection between screen time and all the digital explosions with anxiety in general, and then what we can do with movement-based learning and how that might alleviate some of the things that are going on here, and how can we create inclusive classrooms where all types of learners from all types of backgrounds can come in and feel safe and comfortable practicing their math skills. And then how do you as leaders get teacher buy-in to be able to create these environments? Ultimately, if you're here because you want to see how you can improve test scores, guess what? The more confident and more safe your students feel in their classrooms, the better they're going to perform on those assessments. So let's go ahead and dive into the very first slide. I'm actually going to start with a poll because I'd love to know something from you. So if you're on your computer, go ahead and answer this question. Unruly Math Poll 1. What do you think is the primary cause of math anxiety in students? And I'm going to share my screen so that you guys can see it as well. Wow. Over 80% of you are saying that early negative experiences are creating a lot of the anxiety that students are experiencing in the classrooms today. A small number of you also think that we might be doing too much testing, and we can all name 5 different types of tests, whether it's formative, summative, all those types of tests, or something else going on. But that's really interesting, early negative experiences. So let's dive into the content. Why does math anxiety happen? Math anxiety often stems from learned helplessness, high stakes testing, or often repeated negative experiences that you guys pointed out. Symptoms can range from stress, low confidence, to complete avoidance of the subject altogether. Fear can often hijack a student's brain, like, something's going on, I'm stressed, and it makes it harder for them to be able to access logical thinking, problem solving, making mistakes that they wouldn't make if they were in a comfortable space with that and with those questions. So my first question is for you, Dr. Jameson. Based on your research, developing the first math anxiety scale for primary grades, what are some of the early indicators of math anxiety that you've observed in young students?
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, it's called the Children's Anxiety and Math Scale. And it is for measuring math anxiety in kids approximately like kindergarten through sixth grade ish. Um, and the thing that's cool about it is it uses faces. So, like instead of numbers like adult scales use, it uses like happy faces and frowny faces so that kids can report on what kinds of things make them feel anxious. And what I see over and over and over again is that there are a couple of things that show up. And one of them is that kids with math anxiety tend to avoid math, and they avoid math in lots of different ways, lots of different settings. When I was in elementary school, I remember having to suddenly go to the bathroom or the nurse's office or to get a Kleenex. Every time it was time for math, I remember lying to my mom and telling her that I was sick on days that so that I didn't have to go to school on days that there were math tests. Um, and I wasn't bad at math actually, right? Like I actually got pretty good grades, but I had this anxiety that just made me afraid of it. And it was really based on all these things we talked about, early negative experiences. I saw some things in the chat, parents' negative experiences in math. I grew up in the 80s. And so my parents would stand over me at the table and be like, it's not that hard. You can do it. 2 + 2, right? But then it just kind of perpetuates over time and continues and grows. But you really do see kids avoiding doing math, engaging with math, playing with math toys, because it has such this pressure and stress for the kids.
That's like a really, really good point. And I feel like, we underestimate just how much of an impact those early experiences can have in terms of shaping the entire arc of our classroom experience and our careers. All based on we had a teacher that made us feel comfortable doing this topic. Guess what? They might be off in university studying that topic because of that teacher. So being aware of these things and listening to folks like Molly on this is super important. Next question is for Elizabeth. Like, Elizabeth, in your work with elementary school students, have you ever seen like that learned helplessness manifest itself in like a day-to-day classroom? And what strategies may have you used or seen teachers use to overcome that?
Yeah, so as Elizabeth, just want to preface that I'm answering in her voice here, but learned helplessness, we've definitely seen this at times, and I've noticed that when teachers and associates work together, it is something that can be overcome for students. To combat it, I think a lot of wait time is needed, sometimes using leading questions. But some students who have learned helplessness can usually grow out of it with teachers who are patient. I do a lot of encouragement and praise when they do things on their own, and also talk about how good it feels to do things independently. So, a lot of scaffolding to help build confidence and getting students to verbalize their needs can really help combat against that learned helplessness. One thing I like to do is to ask students to think out loud so I can hear their thinking process and see whether or not they really need help on that skill. And if so, what part of that skill specifically. It's really important to decipher whether it's that lack of confidence in math or if it's something that is lacking in their thinking process around a particular math skill that might need to be addressed. We also really important stress the importance of a growth mindset. So we first train our teachers on it, and then we teach the students about it. One activity that we've done that's really simple, it's with crumpled paper, and I've made a visual to use in here. So we have the students crumple up paper really, really small and explain to them that this is what your brain looks like when you have a fixed mindset, right? But then we have them crumple up other pieces of paper a little less tight to show that when we have a growth mindset, there's so much learning that can happen. And this is what our brain looks like. And we're open to different opportunities to learn instead of when we have that fixed mindset. So something as simple as this can help students, especially younger ones, to really conceptualize such a big concept that is growth mindset. And then the last thing that we do is we use yet in our language. So maybe a student hasn't mastered a skill or a standard yet, but we'll keep working with them and growing with them until they can. So when students get to that point, they've reached that yet, it's important for us to highlight what along the way helped them get to that successful point and give them that feedback so they can continue to kind of implement those skills and processes that help them be successful in that moment. And I think that really has helped combat, the learned helplessness for students. Hopefully did that catch everything, Elizabeth? Okay, perfect.
That worked surprisingly well.
Okay.
I want to pull out something that Elizabeth / Alexa was saying that I think ties into a really big idea here that it may end up being one of the biggest and most important points of the whole webinar is we as humans we have a big desire to please, and we're always thinking about how can we make the people that are over us happy. And so you as leaders in a school environment have a huge impact on what's going on in the classroom, even if you're not directly there doing the teaching and learning yourself, because those teachers are coming in and they are thinking about, okay, what is my school leader or district, or how am I going to be evaluated? And oftentimes we go right to test scores, right? And especially with math, where we're struggling with fluency and all of these other things that we know that we need to do if we're going to show that our kids are growing. Well, at the same time, what goes to the wayside? The culture, the environment, creating a safe space, all of the stuff that's needed to cultivate a safe learning environment for our students, because we just got to make sure they get as much time as possible on whatever the practice fluency piece is. So leaders play a critical role in setting that supportive culture. Like this could be done through professional development. You might want to create a family engagement night, maybe a math night, or anything that we can do to kind of lower that stress level as it relates to math. Big districts like New York City, San Francisco are creating district-wide initiatives around how do we make sure kids are prepared for algebra, or how do we make sure that kids have equal access to opportunities to learn math. But part of those programs is looking at the anxiety piece and what are we doing to create environments that are cultivating learners of these topics. So I know that was a little bit all over the place, so I want to turn it to the experts. Molly, my question for you is, how can a leader effectively use, whether it be data or some other factor, to identify and address patterns of math anxiety?
Yeah, that's a really good question because, most available measures don't necessarily address math anxiety. They might address math knowledge, math skill, but there really isn't often a way to gather data, which brings me back to my scale. It is free. I will gladly share it. It is validated with kids, like I said, K through 6. I would gladly share it, and I can talk to James about how to do that. But it's hard to make data informed decisions without data. And so that's actually the reason I developed the scale originally, was that I wanted teachers and school leaders, administrators to be able to have a way to easily and quickly measure the math anxiety. And then once you know which kids have math anxiety, which ones, are pretty average or low, which ones have anxiety but are doing really well, then you can more do targeted interventions more towards those kids, and address what needs to be addressed. But like I said, it's really hard until you have the data to even be able to start to think about how to impact it in a positive way. And so I think, I, as a leader at my university, I'm also a director of our Center for Teaching and Learning. I have to make data informed decisions, right? I have to give reasons for why I am doing things, and why I'm using a certain framework, or I'm doing certain practices and services and programs. And you have to have that data. And so I think the first step really is measuring it in an effective way.
Yeah, I mean, another way of thinking about it would be you've given us language to talk about it and something that we can point to, versus before it's this like, abstract concept of they have anxiety. What does that mean? And
Hmm.
being able to
Hmm.
point to it and name it. Elizabeth, as an instructional coach, what professional development methods have you found the most effective in supporting teachers to foster math confidence in students?
Yeah, so it really all starts with culture. So you have to have that safe environment where everyone feels comfortable being vulnerable, from both teachers and students. And that starts with leadership. They set the example. And in my building personally, the culture has changed dramatically over time since I've been there. And it didn't happen overnight. So it's not something that we have, a magic wand, even though we might wish we did, to change our culture. But it takes several years to reverse what could be, a very negative culture. But it really all starts with leadership, where they set the tone. And I think one way for leaders to do that is showing that they're willing to try something first, even when it's outside of their comfort zone. So for myself, as an example, I'll tell a teacher, I'm wanting to learn more, about X, Y, and Z. Could I try it in your classroom? And so my willingness to be vulnerable and problem solve with the teacher and their students shows that it's okay to make mistakes. And it's something that I also try to stress during professional development, is that it's okay to try it and fail, and then try again. I think there's a lot of pressure in classrooms, time constraints, testing, all of these things. So there's this pressure that teachers might need to feel the need to be perfect, and they don't have to be. So really emphasizing that it's okay to fail and do that in front of your students. So I encourage the teachers to take time to figure it out and get comfortable with whatever strategy they're implementing, without that fear of failure. As a quick example, we recently in our junior high had a professional development session on implementing a movement-based learning resource, which James will touch on later. But there's tons of games and activities to support content areas in this resource. But I encourage my teachers to start with a simple, really engaging activity that wasn't tied to academic content, just to give them the opportunity as teachers and students, to get familiar with the process of using that new resource without actually requiring like the heavy content knowledge. So giving them that permission, the teachers, to take a day to focus on building excitement, collaboration, engagement, I think was really a crucial part of the professional development experience for teachers. And I think it's important that those professional development sessions, yes, it's great to sit and talk amongst teachers, but then allowing them to go beyond and engage in hands-on experiences has been super impactful. So like with this particular movement-based resource, our PE teacher incorporated the movement-based activities the very next day. And then our science teacher was using them by the end of the week. So taking the time to focus on implementation and letting teachers get their hands on the resource as a part of the professional development has really led to stronger adoption and enthusiasm around the stuff that we're doing professional development. And then lastly, ongoing support. The professional development shouldn't just end, with that session. It needs to continue as we go and implement it with teachers in the classroom. So it allows for gradual release when we do it that way, instead of just teaching it one time and then sending, teachers off to do it on their own. It helps build them that confidence to then eventually be able to implement it with their students on their own. So,
Molly?
Yeah. So, and one other thing that I think is really important is the research pretty clearly shows that elementary school teachers have high math anxiety, higher than many other disciplines. And in fact, when people are selecting their major in college, one of the reasons the elementary education majors report selecting their major is because of math anxiety. They don't necessarily call it that, but they, report being uncomfortable with math. And I actually have a current National Science Foundation grant where I'm studying this in pre-service elementary school teachers. And I think that it's really important to also remember that a lot of the teachers in your buildings either have math anxiety themselves and it's impacting how they teach and the choices that they're making. Research has shown that they can model it for their students, especially their female students, and it continues on with maybe fewer women entering STEM disciplines. But I think also then in like older grades, if people are math teachers, they likely don't have math anxiety because they became a math teacher, right? They're not people with math anxiety avoid that, so they're not going to become a math teacher, and it can be easy for those folks to not realize what math anxiety is and how it can impact their students. So I think going along with that idea of professional development is that what is math anxiety? How does it affect you as a teacher, as an adult, as a person? And then how does it affect your students? So taking these messages from, leadership down to the teachers and saying, this is a thing, you might experience it. I'm always blown away when participants in my research study who are, some in their 20s will say, I never knew that this was a thing. This has been my whole life. And I never knew that it was actually a thing, that there was something I could do about. So I think really spreading that message. Yeah, Lori, I talk about that a lot, about the Barbie back in the 90s that said math is hard, right? It sent a message to people. And so I think letting folks know about math anxiety, that it's a real thing, that a lot of people experience it, and that there are ways to overcome. You don't necessarily get rid of it, but there are ways to overcome it.
You all have done such a good job of highlighting the issue and why it's important at the leadership level for us to take it seriously. In all of our interviews of district leaders in the math space, teachers' experience with math or previous experience with math is the number one issue for why there's struggles right now that they always call out when we have this conversation. So we're right on the money with this conversation. The second poll I have for you all is related to what we just heard, and I would like to hear your reactions. Which leadership strategies do you believe will have the greatest impact on reducing math anxiety? And I'm going to share the results so you can see it in real time. But I'm kind of curious, based on what you just heard, what do you think would be the most impactful? I think we're right, 80% right around like, hey, let's start with the teachers. And I think that's going to be the answer to a lot of education problems. Like, hey, let's empower the teachers. Let's think about how we can best prepare them for what they're going to be going into and doing. I'm biased. I'm a former classroom teacher. My wife's a classroom teacher. Like, this is who we are. So, but you can never go wrong if you start with like, how do we help the teachers do their jobs better? All right, so let me close that poll. Thank you so much. The next topic is kind of thinking about more technology specifically, but the connection between screen time and just anxiety or stress. We have, a lot of districts now that are starting to look at the amount of time a student's spending on a device in a classroom. And I know from a parent's perspective, there's a lot, probably too much time kids are spending on whether it be an iPad or a Chromebook during an academic day. And a lot of those have some negative impacts. Like studies show there's a relationship between how much screen time and maybe some of the mental health struggles that students are having. Too much screen time can disrupt sleep. Obviously, the blue light piece is in there. Reduced focus, sensory engagement. You've all been there where you close your phone from doom scrolling Instagram to like, now the real world's just too boring. And it's an adjustment period back to that. These are real things that, little 6 and 7 and 8-year-old brains are trying to navigate when they have, long periods on an ST math or some sort of adaptive content solution. Nothing against those tools, but time and place and balance. So my first question is for you, Molly, from a research perspective. Like, have you looked at all at some of the screen time stuff that's going on and its impact? Because especially in math classes, that's where I think a lot of these tools are being used first, whether it be Khan Academy or something more recent. And how has it impacted mathematical thinking or math anxiety or anything in that area?
Yeah, so that's not my direct area, but absolutely stay up on the literature and what other folks are doing. And one of the things that we know really clearly is that, in our brains, there's only so much room and there's only so much processing that can happen. And when we're doing learning activities, we're relying on a lot of the different areas of the brain to help us process information, right? And when we're doing math tasks, mathematical thinking, mathematical problem solving, mathematical computation, we're using our working memory. Okay. And the working memory is not very big. It's very important, but it does not store a lot of information, right? And it can't store a lot of information there for very long. And so doing tasks to strengthen our working memory is really what we should be doing. But too much screen time decreases our working memory, its functionality, its processing speed. And so that means that when we're doing math and thinking about math, that we don't have as much brain power, as much resources as we should have, as we would have otherwise, right? And that all of these things are true, right? Like if you're not sleeping very well, you're not learning very well, right? If you're not moving very much, you're not learning very well. If you're engaged in a very unimodal way, right? Like you're only looking at a screen and watching somebody else do something. You're not reading, you're not doing, you're not discussing, you're not creating, then you're not learning, right? Because learning is complex and learning is iterative, and everything, the confidence interacts with the learned helplessness, that interacts with the motivation, that interacts with the anxiety. And we need healthy brains in order to do those things, to be motivated, to be engaged. And so, yeah, so screen time absolutely it increases people's anxiety. It decreases our learning capability. And you want me to wait for that question,
Oh, if
James?
if
About
you have an answer now too, like for sure, I was just referring people to the Q&A. But if you want to dive
Yeah,
into it
no,
right now, let's
I
go
can
ahead.
hold it. I'll hold
Okay.
it because I'll get too off topic because I'm really passionate about it. So I'll get too off topic, but I'll hold that for later. But yeah,
Great question.
absolutely. Like, screen time really negatively affects overall our learning in so many ways.
Elizabeth, how do you like balance technology integration with the opportunities for maybe either screen free or screen reduced, more hands-on activities within the district?
Yeah, so some of the teachers in the school I work in, they use apps or iPads on iPads or sorry, or websites as a review of lessons to provide additional practice. But the majority of our math instruction is screen free. And with many math websites, we've noticed that some of the students or most of the students were skipping through videos that actually try to teach the skills. So the use of that technology became kind of counterintuitive. We had a program at the junior high level that matched our standards perfectly. So as a teacher, it was really easy to find practice on the specific skill we were working on. But we were very frustrated that students were seeming to be rushing through the practice and not actually reading through the feedback that the program provided. And it's easy, to get in the mindset of thinking, oh, they're just rushing through. But then in talking to students, we realized that it was actually causing them anxiety, like that program we were using. Each time they got a question wrong, it took their score down. And we didn't realize how detrimental this was, like how the students were feeling about math. They were so anxious or stressed about getting a question wrong and losing points that they weren't even really focusing on the skill at hand within the program. So That was really a big aha moment for me and I think our staff when we got together and discussed it. And we decided that we needed to find other ways to meet students' needs, and that screen-free instruction and practice where we're face-to-face with the students was really the most effective. But we know that that can't happen every day and have individual touch points with each student every day. So we have found some technology that's most effective in math when students are using some sort of program like Flipgrid, Canva, or Seesaw to make videos explaining what they've learned. So it's really using like technology not to do the learning, but to enhance the learning. Sometimes it can be hard for students to write down, what they and explain in writing. So giving them the tools to explain verbally, I think, has really been an effective use of technology in the classroom. So a lot of our teachers have been using that to integrate technology while still kind of keeping that screen balance in the classroom.
Yeah, and I think somebody in the audience pointed out that they need to take their assessments on the computers. So in fact, when Chromebooks came out in the kind of the early 2010s, 11s, it was the fact that assessments were moving to a computer that actually created this massive one-to-one movement across the country because schools needed to have a device for kids to take the tests. And like I think we all recognize that in a math environment, especially, technology will be playing a role. However, would we be happy with, every time a kid came into a math class, they filed in, they put their headphones in, sat in front of their computer, did their 45 minutes, and then filed out when they were done? No, like that's defeating the purpose of us coming together in a classroom. So it's a balance. When and where and how much is what we're trying to figure out here. And when can you add movement? When can you add other pieces to the puzzle that creates an experience that builds confidence and makes them, not afraid of the content or on an island trying to struggle through some sort of online tool or something like that. So that brings us to kind of the first big strategy, which is movement based. And everything here is going to be kind of a scale, starting with like just, hey, stand up, move around, get the wiggles out, sit back down, let's go, to actual lessons that you can do and tools that you can use to be able to facilitate a movement based math learning activity in your classroom, especially at the K-8 level, where the wiggles are just really, really hard to contain. Research shows you that increased like physical movement can increase cognitive function. And we all know this. If you are struggling with something and you have the ability to just go for a walk for 30 minutes, your brain might work that out because your neurons are firing much faster. Moving around can also reduce stress. Like if you're angry at somebody, before you push send on that email back, take a walk. See if you feel the same in 30 minutes because it can reduce that heightened stress that you're feeling in your body. And it also can improve your focus. If you're trying to figure out something challenging and you are moving around thinking, it might come to you. That's why the shower moment's a thing. Because in the shower, you're standing, you're doing something different, like, aha, I have a solution. So we know that movement can be a very powerful tool. Now, how do we bring it into the classroom? And I want to start with Molly. What does the research indicate in terms of the relationship between physical movement and cognitive processing in mathematics? And sorry if I took any of the thunder with those examples.
No, that's fine. And it's interesting because no one has, to my knowledge, no one has actually researched how movement affects math anxiety, which I'm jotting down research ideas over here as we speak. So, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research across education, um, in sports and exercise science and biology and other natural and physical healths and sciences that talks about how movement really affects our mental processing across lots of ways, right? It affects our, you mentioned our cognitive, like mathematical processes. So if I am doing, for instance, let me write this down. Okay, so if I am doing a math problem that is 7x plus 3 equals 24, okay? And like I'm trying to do that in my head. 7x plus 3 equals 24. There's steps that I need to do. I have to hold that in my head. I have to say, okay, I need to subtract 3 from each side. That makes 7x equals 21. Now I need to divide each side by 7. That means x equals 3, right? And then let me plug it in. Yes, it works, right? And I'm doing all that in my brain, in my working memory, in the processing and attentional everything in my brain. And in order to do that well, my neurons need to talk to each other, right? They need to send electrical messages across dendrites. They have to go from this part of your brain to this part of your brain to this part of your brain, right? In order to do that, we have to have healthy brains. I said that earlier. I'll say that again, right? And the physical movement absolutely, like you said, does all these things. It takes your mind off of it. It gets your brain healthy. It gets endorphins going. It makes you calm and more mindful, right? So there's all kinds of things that it affects our actual cognitive processing. And then it affects our mood too, right? Like James said, if you're mad at somebody, don't hit send on the email. Get up and go take a walk. If I'm trying to do math and I'm saying, I can't do this, I'm not smart enough, I didn't work hard enough, whatever, right? If I get up and I move, I get those zoomies out. I actually have an app in my phone that reminds me twice a day during the workday to get up and move, right? Because it's that important to letting some things go, to, reminding yourself what really matters. And that, like, for me, I have to remind myself sometimes, teaching is an act of love. And that, I need that moment to move. And I have colleagues at work. We get together every day and we take a walk. Just to get out of the office, to get moving. Sorry, I got a little off topic there, but I think that yeah, physical movement helps our learning in part because it helps our mood, our mental well-being, and it kind of puts everybody on a more even playing field. So some kids come to school really stressed. Some kids come to school, like they in danger, and allowing all kids to get some of that out, kind of frees up functioning for all the kids so that everybody can learn.
Well, and that's a great point. I want to remind everybody that like this is all pretty new. Like as we pointed out at the very beginning of the webinar, when Molly got into researching math anxiety, there was literally one published article on the topic. And if you think about it, like 15 years ago, computers were these clunky carts that we wheeled into classrooms and like kids would like pull out and try them. So like we're dealing with these factors that weren't previously there. We're kind of charting like new territory when it comes to like how does technology play a role in the classroom? How do kids, feelings and anxieties and all of those other soft factors play into this? And how do we create environments where we can mitigate some of those challenges that might be going on? Because like we all know that the technology is only going to get crazier and the tools are only going to get way out there. So we have to be proactive about creating inclusive classrooms, thinking about how can we set up an environment that can welcome some of the changes, whether it be technological or some sort of strategy that comes down. Experiences. This might be, manipulatives and any sort of hands-on stuff, different types of visuals. These are the things that you already know that are watching and are doing these things. I guess my only question or ask here is to be mindful about like how do we create stuff that's going to create a safe space for the kids that are tackling these challenges or have these challenges. I'll start with a question for you, Molly. Like how can educators, or leaders in this case, um, basically create more inclusive environments in the classroom themselves?
Hmm. Hmm. So I just a minute ago on the last question I mentioned, education is an act of love, and therefore teaching is courageous, and that comes from Paulo Freire's book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and the ideas that education, the goal of education, is equitable access, to knowledge. And I think that I should have prepped this answer beforehand so that I don't get so that I don't get too off. But I think that it's just really critical to remember that inclusive classrooms, inclusive pedagogy is really meaning for all, right? It means for the students who come from a low SES background. It refers to the students who are hard of hearing or who are deaf. It's the students who are a racial or ethnic minority, an English language learner. Like, it's a very broad idea, to what it means to be an inclusive teacher. And I think that one of the primary ways, aside from, so doing things to build community in your classroom is a huge way to be inclusive, right? Like, helping everybody understand that they're a community of learners. But when it comes to what the research says about like pedagogical strategies for building an inclusive classroom, one of the biggest, clearest in the literature is active learning, where the teacher is not giving the information to the students, but the students are active participants in building their own knowledge through problem-based learning, through inquisition, through application, think, pair, shares, like, engagement, collaboration, right? All of those things that are active learning practices are going to promote inclusivity, in our classroom. And also thinking about things like universal design for learning, making sure that when our curriculum and our core classrooms are set up and designed, that we're thinking about everyone's possible needs from the very beginning, that we're making everything has captions on it, that you have an ASL interpreter ready for your events, that your materials are large enough and are available to be read by screen readers, and so really just thinking about those things: course design or classroom design with universal design for learning, engaging in active learning practices where the students are actively involved. And then, what was the first thing I said? Oh, building a sense of belonging, like building a community that everybody it's a place, like where Elizabeth mentioned earlier, it's a place that's safe to make mistakes and ask questions. And that we're a community and we're all going to do this together. Somebody put in the chat earlier that they regularly make mistakes, on purpose so that their students can see them doing that and that it's an okay thing to do.
Mhm.
Strategies if you found most successful in making math accessible to the learners in your school?
Yeah, so I actually asked the fifth graders in my school what helped them most in math, and they identified strategies such as drawing pictures, so like tape diagrams, having the teacher read a story problem to them, or using strategies to get an answer, such as skip counting and even taking deep breaths. So I thought it was really interesting that students even recognized and talked about some of like self-regulating strategies, and thought that was interesting to see. In our district, we do use materials like manipulatives and visuals to make math more concrete. So things like base 10 blocks, fraction pieces, place value charts. We also include, like Molly was mentioning, accommodations to make sure that every student has what they need to be successful. So making sure the text is large enough for all of our students, or some students might require a certain color of background paper for their vision. So making sure that they have those accommodations that they need to be successful. Another strategy that we like to use is math buddies or partners. So when we're practicing a skill, students often do it with their partner, and eventually they'll do it on their own and compare with their partner, so they can start to learn with each other and have those math talks where they're explaining how they got their answer and building their knowledge off of each other. And then one thing that Molly mentioned as well, those active learning practices, we also take time for those. So instead of just doing 5 problems that are, just solving facts, we throw in one problem that has a real world application as well. So that one problem might take us 5 to 10 minutes, but we really feel that the students get more out of it in the long run. And it's worth taking that extra time to go deep with that problem. And I think that, just a comment from me, Alexa, I think that's super relevant, because I think we always hear like students saying like, when am I going to use this ever again? And having those real world application problems is super helpful to show students that math is relevant and this is why you need to be learning these things. So now back to Elizabeth. Small groups is another thing that has been super successful with us for students. You're able to get those extra touch points in with students where you might not always get that in that whole group setting. So then you can kind of pinpoint those specific skills that a student might have a gap in and work on building that skill up in a small group. Our junior high has something called win time, which is what I need. And that's a time when we work with those small groups to make sure we're just getting that extra skill building time with students in the areas that they need it. And we might also do some pre-teaching or some just-in-time learning for what will be coming up in those small groups as well.
All right, so this one's a fun poll question, but maybe fun for me. I'm kind of curious, like if you're a school leader or you're, making decisions on helping students or teachers use these skills in the classroom, which one is the most intriguing to you? So, like, these are different active learning strategies that you might want to add. Very lightweight, nothing too serious here. But I'm kind of curious, like, which one jumps out to you? Like there's always an answer that's like 80%. I gotta get better at like creating questions that are, not. So most of you are pointing out that collaborative problem solving is one. And I think that's like one of the big points that needs to be reiterated. Like when you go to school, it's a great opportunity to work together with your peers. So it's not about just sitting in a terminal like on, doing some adaptive content solution. Like work together. And then so I know it's super tricky, but it is something that needs to be reminded. So the next slide is actually transitioning to tools and resources. We have some fun ones to share, and then this webinar is sponsored by Unruly Math, and we will talk about that in just a moment as well. So I wanted to, we'll come back to the Q&A, a little out of order, that's my fault. So we have a handful of resources here. I want to talk about just a few. The first one is the Jo Boaler is one of the leaders in the space. She's a pioneer researcher in terms of math and math mindsets. There's a book of hers called Math Mindsets. She's a professor out of Stanford. Does fantastic work. I recommend that very highly. Go Noodle is on the kind of the good way to get started into the spectrum in terms of active learning. That's the brain breaks. That's the like, hey, let's take a break, get out of our seats, wiggle around and dance to something, and then come back and do something more serious. But then Unruly Math, obviously we are the sponsor, but I'd love to hear from Elizabeth because I know that you use Unruly products quite a bit to create active learning in your school. So how do you use Unruly Math?
Yeah, so we've used Unruly Math in both large group and small group settings in our district. For example, our second graders did an activity from Unruly Math called Building Tens and Ones this past week. So we put the class into 5 groups of 3 students, so they were working together, and each team took a turn facing off with each other, trying to build double-digit numbers using these little splats that you see on the screen. So they would stomp on one that represented the tens, and then the other splat represented the ones, and they were taking their time to build to that double-digit number and practicing those place value seconds. So, the place value skills. So the teamwork and collaboration was a huge part of this. And Unruly Math really allows students to use those 21st century skills because all of the activities that you do in Unruly Math are designed to be played, in teams or small groups like we did with those second graders. On the smaller group side of things, our Title I teacher uses Unruly Math with 6th graders, and she uses it as a way of kind of differentiating learning for them, most specifically. And recently they did a game called Rounding to Any Place. And it was designed to have the students practice rounding to the nearest tens, hundreds, or thousands. And that's normally a 4th grade standard, but because it was game-based and playful, the students were excited to do that and were able to get some active practice with a skill that they needed to then move on to those larger numbers in the 6th grade setting. So really building that confidence through a fun, active game that got them out of their seats. So yeah, that's kind of, we use it in the big group and in small group settings, and really just to get students collaborating and doing math in a more social and active way.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth/Alexa. And then Yolanda in the chat, you can definitely reach out and we can set up a demo for you. In just a second, Diane, I want you to play the short video, but before you do, I want to kind of share kind of why I'm excited, why I'm here today working at Unruly. Before this, I did start out as a classroom teacher teaching in South Los Angeles and in San Francisco. And then I was fortunate enough to spend some time at Google as advising on some of the Chromebook launch stuff. And then I ended up getting a chance to work at for the federal government on building the Future Ready Schools initiative. And in all of those rooms, when we're thinking about the future of education and what is possible, we dreamed about companies like Unruly that would do something different, get kids out of their seats, move around. Like, it's not just like take this worksheet and digitize it. Like, how can we actually do it differently that's going to benefit our students? So right now we have a handful of New York City schools that are using it, and that'll be the video that I show you. Hawaii is using it for computer science stuff. All of Nova Scotia is using it for computer science stuff, and math is starting to explode, including San Diego is now looking at it to bring it into their district. So I've been really excited to kind of see this like new movement explode around Unruly Math, and I want to show you just a 2-minute video on what it looks like in the classroom.
It's a different feel from the typical math class. I think what makes Splat so inviting is the fact that there's movement, one, and two, I think it's almost like creating a new memory of math, that if they see me taking out the Splats or they hear the kind of noise it makes when you're connecting it to Bluetooth, they get super excited, they smile, they cheer. So it's generally a very positive reaction.
This is our second year with illustrative math, and we found that Unruly Math fit well because it still caters to the idea of collaboration, discussion, students working together to problem solve. What's been most impactful has been their joy. I really have loved seeing first grade just light up because now I'm able to see math come to life. Just watching their enjoyment and say, are we going to have Unruly Math today? And them thinking more on their toes, that's another thing that we've been promoting for them. Like, hey, we need you to be automatic and fluent, and this is going to help with that. And we need you to be patient and listen and wait for your teammate, work together. So that's helping reinforce our belief in teamwork and think time. So I believe that when students are excited about learning, when they feel that they're part of a community, when they feel that they have a say, when they can program, when they can code, when they can actively engage throughout the day, and not only just intellectually but physically, it increases attendance. It increases their excitement about what they're learning.
There's one specific student in mind who doesn't particularly enjoy math. So seeing her kind of step out of her shell and work with someone else to solve a problem is exciting. Students that may be too shy normally or kind of shut down during math brighten up and are excited and want to do the work, even if they're not exactly sure or don't feel the most confident. The fact that they have a peer to work with and that they can move and they can jump and they can do all these things that typically don't happen in math class makes me excited, because I truly believe learning should be fun.
One of the things that we say in our school community, we like quiet hallways but noisy classrooms. So I feel a lot of joy when I see the noisy classrooms and it's all about math. And we're shouting out math facts, and you see them counting with their fingers and trying to figure it out. So the perfect student is a child that's active, that's moving, that's cheering, that's super excited about being in the classroom.
Them being able to do the math while still being able to move and learn from each other and play this game and have fun while doing it, I think is amazing.
Well, thank you so much for sitting through that video. We love it too. And I think one of the things I want to just reiterate is that, the technology goes to the side, right? And it's on the screen, but it's over there, and they're actually still using the whiteboards. They're collaborating. It's all the stuff that you want to see in a classroom. So let's turn to some Q&A. Because we had at least one, but I think there was several questions in there. Let me pull up the audience questions. Okay, we'll start with the one that Rachel asked earlier. Like, what activities can we do to support working memory? So go ahead, Molly.
Yeah, sure. So, fortunately, and we did not plan this part of the presentation at all, but active learning strategies strengthen folks' working memory. So doing a variety of different kinds of things are going to strengthen our memory. In addition to that, though, really strengthening our working memory relies on things being chunked down into smaller bits. So instead of, giving one giant list of instructions, giving a step-by-step list to students, presenting information in multiple ways. So visually use graphs and figures and images along with verbally, along with, kinesthetically or movement based, along with performance based, like presenting information in lots of different ways and having students engage with the learning in lots of different ways really helps. And then different kinds of teaching and learning strategies. So when we gamify our learning and we do, things that are more fun and engaging, the way repetition is huge, right? Like if you have working memory deficits, or you're just working to strengthen your working memory, engaging in repetition and review, getting into routines. That's one reason I think, especially in like elementary school, there's a very like clear structure to the day, because it's helping strengthen those kids' working memory about what school is and what kinds of skills and processes I need to be ready. But a big one really is engaging in active learning strategies, whether that's movement or, portfolios or problem-based learning, right? Having students do more active kinds of things.
I know there's a lot of folks in the audience that are wanting to take advantage of having your time here with us today, Molly, and in your research background and your expertise on the space. So Britt has two questions. I'm going to combine them into one, or two parts at least. So right now, all of our conversations so far are centered around math anxiety. But what role does math trauma, and I'll be honest, I've never heard that phrase before, but what role does math trauma play in the conversation, and do you differentiate between the two? And then the second question, just so you have both of them, is there any research on math anxiety in school leaders or teachers?
Yeah, those are excellent questions. Before I answer that, and I'll try to be really short about it, somebody asked Yvonne or Yolanda. It was Yvonne. If there are movement math activities for older grades, like middle and high school, I just wanted to make sure that got addressed, because I think that middle and high school math anxiety does often get overlooked. So do y'all have middle and high school stuff?
Oh, we don't, but if there's tools, please recommend them so that we can get them to those people.
So I'm not aware of any tools for like this either but I do wonder if some of these could be applied
Yeah,
to
we have
older.
we have plans to expand first into middle school and then beyond. So yeah, it's coming. And
Cool.
if you are like, I want this for my high school and want to work alongside us to help create that, don't hesitate to shoot an email and we can chat at least. I definitely don't want to close that door. But so yeah.
Okay, cool. Math trauma is a huge issue. Like I really discourage folks from using timed math kinds of activities, because when you put time pressure on students, it can really cause them some trauma. Or like when I said earlier about my parents like standing at the kitchen table yelling at me about math and how it was so easy, like that was absolutely traumatic. And I'm glad my mom is not particularly tech savvy, so she won't necessarily watch this webinar today. But my mom and dad both encourage or engaged in behaviors that resulted in some math trauma. For me, I think that people can have math anxiety without being traumatized by math, right? So sometimes it is absolutely because of math trauma. Something terribly embarrassing or punishing happens to you that causes this almost phobia like thing. But other folks can develop math anxiety and not have had that type of traumatic experience with math. And so I think they are two separate constructs. And I think that it's very likely that experiencing trauma is likely to lead to having math anxiety, but not everyone with math anxiety has also had math trauma.
with that, I will say thank you so much, Molly. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Special thank you to Alexa, who just this morning figured out that she was going to be doing this. That was an amazing job as well. Thank you, EdWeb, for hosting us, and Diane, everything you do to put this together. Today was awesome. I learned a whole bunch. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Everybody here will be getting an email with resources like Unruly Math and how you can book a demo to learn more and how schools are doing that. And with that, we hope to see you the next time we get to do one of these. So thank you all for joining us, and we will end right at the top of the hour.
Thank you.
Thank you.